They told me solitude would heal me, that the silence of the mountains, the stillness of the forest, would give me back my peace. And for a while, they were right. But there are things in the woods that don't belong, things that notice when you're alone that watch when no one else is watching. I went up the mountain to escape my past. What found me there shouldn't exist at all. The morning sun broke over the ridgeline like a slow-moving fire, spilling amber light across the trees and rock. I sat in the swivel chair near the eastern window of the lookout, my coffee steaming in the still air. June 3rd, third season on Baker Peak. The entry in my wildlife journal was simple. Dot sighted, northeast clearing, third consecutive season return. She was right on schedule. The cougar stood at the forest's edge, tan fur glowing in the morning sun, the same strange black spot on her shoulder that had earned her the name. She looked up toward the tower with calm, intelligent eyes, as though she remembered me. I raised my mug in a silent toast. "Morning to you too," I said aloud. After all this time, I'd grown used to talking to myself, or to the animals. It was just part of the rhythm. Solitude wasn't a punishment out here, it was structure, a slow dance with the forest. I wrote the sighting down in my notebook, my handwriting neat and steady after 3 seasons of this quiet life. One of the small, unexpected benefits of isolation, improved penmanship. Time slowed here. There was space between thoughts, between tasks. And for a man like me, tired of people, noise, judgment, that space was everything. 20 miles in every direction, nothing but trees, rock, and sky. The Olympic National Forest spread around me like a green ocean, its peaks and valleys hidden beneath thick evergreen canopies. From Baker Peak on a clear day, I could see nearly 30 miles out. The tower itself was a narrow structure, 16 feet by 6, perched on stilts, modest and weathered by seasons past. It had windows on all sides and creaked gently when the wind came in from the south. But it was mine. From June through September, this small slice of sky and forest belonged to me. Inside the cabin, my life was sparse and functional. A narrow cot against one wall, a propane stove with 2 burners, shelves of books and notebooks, a small wooden desk for weather logs and reports, and a chest that held my few clothes. The firefinder sat at the center of the room, a circular map with sighting devices, ready to help me pinpoint the first sign of smoke. Even early in the season, I made my scans diligently. Routine was important. In fact, it was everything. After my morning scan, I made breakfast, oatmeal with dried berries, and settled in near the window to eat. The sun was still low, casting long shadows across the ridges. The only sound was the distant call of a hawk and the occasional sigh of wind through pine needles. Most people couldn't handle this life. I'd seen them come and go, rookies who arrived full of energy and quit within weeks, unable to cope with the silence, the stillness, the feeling of being watched by nothing but trees. But I'd lasted. 3 years ago, I'd left behind a job I hated, a marriage that was dead long before it ended, and a life in the city that felt like a long, suffocating tunnel. Up here, I could breathe again. Up here, I had purpose. I checked in with headquarters around 7 a.m., the usual morning call. Dan Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio, warm and familiar. "Supply run next Monday," he'd said. "Need anything special?" "Negative," I replied. "Standard is fine." I hung up the receiver and looked back out the window. Nothing but swaying trees and a hawk circling the western ridge. The rest of the morning followed its usual pattern. Hourly scans with the binoculars, noting wind speed, temperature, humidity. I filled out my logbook with care, even though most of the information wouldn't matter to anyone but me. I tracked everything: weather patterns, animal sightings, shifts in color and shadow on the slopes. Not because I had to, but because it made me feel anchored. I'd started sketching recently too, though my drawings were rough at best. Today, I worked on a pencil sketch of the western ridgeline, trying to capture the way the trees turned, blue-gray in the distance. By noon, the sun was high and the air had warmed. I opened the windows wide and changed into a t-shirt. Lunch was crackers with peanut butter and an apple, eaten while watching a red-tailed hawk glide above the valley. I jotted down another note in my wildlife journal. 4 kinds of deer, so far this season, 17 bird species, and of course Dot. I liked knowing I was the only one who saw these things, that I could name them, log them, track their returns. In a way, it felt like they were visiting me, like I belonged to this place as much as they did. The afternoon passed in quiet chores. I swept the floor, cleaned the windows, checked my water tanks. I repaired a hinge on the storage chest, then reorganized the bookshelf. The sun dipped lower, softening the world into orange and gold. I did my final scan at dusk and stepped out onto the catwalk that circled the tower. Dinner was simple, rehydrated. Pasta, canned chicken, and tea. I ate slowly, watching the sky shift into stars. There was no noise except the whisper of wind, the occasional hoot of an owl, and the quiet creak of the tower settling into night. As I wrote my final entry in the day's log, I looked out one last time through the eastern window. The forest below seemed endless, like a living thing breathing in slow rhythm. Most people would find it boring, but for me this silence was salvation. This solitude had patched holes I hadn't known were there. It had taught me how to be alone without being lonely. I lay in bed, listening to the distant rustle of animals in the underbrush, the sigh of trees in the night wind. My last thought before drifting to sleep was simple, content. Tomorrow will be more of the same, and that's exactly what I want. It was just past noon on July 15th, when something shifted. The heat had been building for days, pressing against the tower like a heavy hand. Even with every window open, the air barely moved. I'd stripped down to a tank top and shorts, a damp bandana tied around my neck to keep cool. I'd seen it before, this kind of oppressive stillness, but something about this heat felt different. Not just physical, it had weight. A density in the air that made the hairs on my arms rise without wind to stir them. The eastern valley looked wrong, not in a way I could easily explain. It shimmered with a heat haze that twisted the outlines of trees, made them appear to breathe or dance just out of rhythm. I leaned forward, squinting against the light, and raised my binoculars. The distortion was thickest along the tree line. About a mile out, something caught my eye, movement, a shift in shape. At first I thought it was a bear. Bear, I muttered, reaching automatically for my weather log. I started to record the sighting. General direction, time, behavior. Black bears were common around this area during berry season, and it wasn't unusual to see one skirting the forest edge. But as I looked back through the binoculars, my pen stopped mid-sentence. The shape had moved closer, much closer. What I'd thought was a bear now stood upright, still, watching. The heat shimmer made it hard to see details, but I could make out the basic silhouette. It was tall, far taller than any human should be. I estimated 7 feet, maybe more. Thin, almost unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed just slightly off, like a scarecrow built by someone who had only read about humans in a book. Its arms were too long, the hands dangling well past its waist. Its neck was thin, head tilted slightly like it was listening. I blinked, wiped sweat from my forehead and looked again. Still there. It hadn't moved from its new position, about 30 yards, closer to the tower than when I'd first seen it. My stomach dropped. I hadn't looked away for more than 10 seconds. Nothing that big should be able to move that fast without sound, without stirring brush or startling birds. But the clearing remained quiet, silent even. The thing wasn't A bear. That much I knew. It stood at the edge of the trees, perfectly still, as if carved from the shadows, and it was staring at me. I couldn't see its face clearly, just the sense of it, the unnatural tilt of its head, the way its form seemed to hum against the haze. The longer I looked, the more it seemed wrong. Not evil exactly, not at first, just alien. A shape that didn't belong in this world. I lowered the binoculars and rubbed my eyes, heart knocking against my ribs. When I looked again, it was still there. No movement, no shift in posture, still as a statue. What the hell are you? I whispered under my breath. I forced my hand to steady enough to pick up my notebook. July 15th, 12:37 p.m. Eastern tree line, approx. 1 mile. Initial movement suggested black bear. Now appears humanoid, extremely tall, 7+ feet, unusual limb. Proportions, stationary at forest edge. Possible unauthorized hiker in costume, but unlikely due to location. I tried to sketch the outline in the margin of the page, just the rough shape. It looked like something a child would draw when told to imagine a monster. Uneven, off balance, wrong. I searched my memory for logical explanations. Maybe it was someone in a ghillie suit, a backpacker with weird gear, a ranger I didn't know. But no one should be out here, especially not on foot, especially not without notifying me. And no ranger walked like that. I picked up the radio, still watching the figure. Headquarters, this is Baker Peak. Come in. Over. Static. I tried again. Possible unauthorized individual in section E7, requesting confirmation of any field. Personnel in the area. Over. More static. Then a warbled fragment of sound like someone talking through water. A syllable. A click. Then nothing. The storm. It had to be interfering. Storms often played havoc with the radio this far up. I set it down and looked again. The figure hadn't moved. Not an inch. I spent the next hour switching between my routine duties and watching the thing. It never left the tree line, never shifted. Posture. No one stands that still for that long, not without effort, not without a reason. I tried the radio 5 more times. Nothing but fragmented static and empty signals. At 2:42 p.m., as without warning, it turned. It didn't walk or wander or shuffle. It simply pivoted in a slow, deliberate movement and stepped backward into the trees. Within seconds, it vanished, like it had never been there. I dropped the binoculars onto the desk and let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The pressure at the base of my skull began to ease, but the nausea in my gut didn't go away. I felt invaded, watched, like the forest had opened an eye and focused directly on me. The peace I'd cultivated over 3 seasons cracked a little, and in the silence that followed, I could feel the hair on the back of my neck still standing. The rest of the afternoon blurred past. I forced myself through weather readings, journal, entries, a second scan of the area. The figure didn't return, but its absence felt like a presence of its own. I couldn't stop glancing toward the eastern tree line, even when I knew it was gone. I didn't eat much that evening, just forced down a protein bar with a bottle of water and sat quietly with the journal open on my desk. I read over the entry, again and again, questioning everything I'd written. Maybe it was a bear, maybe the heat distorted its shape, maybe I imagined the limbs, the height. Maybe. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. And worse, I knew it had seen me. That night the forest changed. I felt it before I saw anything. Something subtle at first, like the silence had a different texture. The usual nighttime orchestra of insects and rustling leaves faded too quickly after sunset. At first I thought it was just my nerves reacting to the figure I'd seen earlier. But when even the wind seemed to hesitate, I understood it wasn't just in my head. The forest was holding its breath. I went through my evening routine mechanically, double-checking the logs, confirming the tower's security, testing the locks on each window and the main door. I checked my flashlight batteries, loaded my rifle, and placed it in the corner like I always did during storm season. It was all standard, all protocol. But for the first time in 3 years, I did it with shaking hands. The storm rolled in around 9 p.m., a wall of thunderclouds descending like smoke over the ridges, swallowing the last light from the sky. A hot wind preceded it, pressing against the glass in rhythmic bursts. Then came the rain, sudden and violent, hammering the windows like fists. The air inside the tower went damp and cold, and the familiar creaking of the wooden structure turned, harsh, strained. My little cabin in the sky groaned under the weight of wind. I tried to read, tried to calm my racing thoughts with the comforting monotony of a dog-eared novel. But every sound outside felt amplified, exaggerated. Each creak, each shift in the storm sent a new spike of anxiety up my spine. The pages trembled in my hands. At 10:43 p.m. it started. The sound came from the east side of the tower. A light, deliberate scratching against the window, too faint to be debris or a swaying branch. I froze. My body stiffened as if I'd been plunged into ice water. I waited, breath held, pulse pounding in my throat. Another scrape followed, this time on the north side. I moved slowly to the middle of the room, staying low, careful not to cast a shadow near the windows. The scratching continued, faint but purposeful, traveling along the walls as though something were testing each surface, probing for weakness. No animal made sounds like that. It was too measured, too curious. Then came the footsteps. At first, they were muffled beneath the wind and rain, just heavy thumps on soaked earth. But they grew louder, more distinct. A 3-beat rhythm, thump, 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 pause, then again. Always in the same pattern. My breath hitched in my throat. The sound circled the base of the tower once, then again. It didn't hurry. Whatever it was, it knew I was up there. And it wasn't afraid. The tower was 30 feet above the ground, but I'd never felt so exposed. I could hear the footsteps approach the metal staircase, the hollow clang of something heavy stepping onto the first stair. I counted with clenched teeth. 1, 2, 3. Pause. It was climbing. I grabbed the rifle and moved to the far corner, rifle aimed at the door. The footsteps stopped. Right outside. For a long moment, there was nothing but the frantic drumming of rain on the roof and the distant rumble of thunder. Then the doorknob began to turn, slowly, almost politely. It clicked against the deadbolt and stopped. Silence. Again. Then a weight pressed against the door, a soft push, then harder. The old wood groaned. I could see it flex slightly beneath the strain. The hinges whined as if they might give. "Who's there?" I called out, voice cracking with fear I couldn't disguise. There was no answer, just a long, deep breath from the other side of the door. The kind of breath a predator might take before a kill. The air turned colder. I could see my breath in front of me, in July, inside a sealed room. My whole body shivered, sweat and chill mixing into a miserable film on my skin. The scratching resumed, this time directly on the door. Long, deliberate strokes from top to bottom. It didn't sound like fingernails or claws. It was too clean, too sharp, like metal dragged over wood. The noise made my skin crawl. I backed away, bumping into the bed. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in my arms. Suddenly, a loud thud hit the door. Then another, and another. Boom, boom, boom. The impact shook the entire tower. Dust rained from the ceiling. My ears rang with each strike. Then the noise shifted, moving in a circle. Boom on the east window, boom on the north, the south, the west. A methodical attempt. It was testing every wall, every window. One by one, I caught glimpses of a tall, dark figure passing between the windows. its shape distorted by the storm and the wet glass. Too tall to be human, it moved with purpose, its silhouette flowing from one side of the tower to the next. Sometimes it paused, sometimes it scratched again, but it never left. The attack continued for hours, then stopped. No final bang, no signal of retreat, just silence, sudden and absolute. I waited for it to start again. Every creak in the tower, every gust of wind sent my nerves flaring. My eyes were dry from not blinking. My muscles ached from holding the rifle in the same position. I didn't move until the rain began to ease, and the faintest grey light seeped into the sky. I finally lowered the rifle, but only slightly. Cautiously, I approached the eastern window. Nothing moved in the clearing below. No dark figures, no unnatural silhouettes, but something had changed. The forest didn't feel like mine anymore, it felt claimed, and I was a trespasser. I slept in short bursts that morning, rifle clutched to my chest, dreams full of twisted shadows and warped voices. When I woke, I thought I'd imagined it all, but the claw marks on the door said otherwise. So did the deep scratches beneath the east window. Something had come to my tower, something big, something patient, and something that would be back. The next day passed like a dream, grey, jittery, and half submerged in a fog of exhaustion. I barely remembered eating. My notes from the morning radio check-in were scribbled and uneven, and even though I repeated the weather conditions by rote, I couldn't remember hearing a response. My mind kept drifting back to the door, the scratches, the weight that had pressed against it in the night. No animal behaved like that, no human either. I tried to write down what had happened, to make sense of it, but my thoughts came in loops. Did I imagine the sound of the footsteps, the knocks? Could the wind really have mimicked a pattern so deliberate? But then I'd glance at the door, at the claw-like marks on the frame, and I'd remember the pressure, the force of it. It had been real, whatever it was. All day, I felt like I was walking through someone else's life. I kept scanning the tree line, waiting for a figure to emerge from the trees again, but nothing moved. Not even the usual wildlife. No birdsong, no squirrels skittering through the underbrush. Just an uneasy quiet that pressed against the windows like a second storm. I cleaned and resecured the damaged window, adding new screws to the latches, and reinforcing the seal with duct tape and hope. I moved furniture to block off the weakest points. I kept the rifle nearby, within arm's reach, no matter where I sat. That evening, as the sun dipped low and bled red across the sky, a creeping dread began to rise in my chest. I wanted to believe that whatever had come last night was just a one-time thing, a rogue animal confused by the storm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been something more, something curious, something methodical, something that had learned. The night came slower than I expected. I kept all the lights off inside the tower, save for a single battery-powered lantern beside my bed. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, but I also couldn't bear to sit in the dark. The rifle lay across my lap as I sat on the edge of the bed, listening, waiting. At first there was nothing, just the gentle creak of the tower in the breeze, the faint rustle of distant pine needles. It was almost peaceful. For a while I let myself believe that maybe I'd imagined it all. Maybe sleep deprivation had gotten the better of me. Maybe then, just after midnight, the sound returned, a soft thump on the east wall, followed by 3 deliberate knocks on the north window. Not the same booming force as before. These were quieter, gentler, almost polite. I stood slowly, rifle raised, heart already racing. Then I heard it, a voice. "Help me." It was faint, carried by the wind, and came from the east. A man's voice, cracked, panicked. I froze. "Is someone there?" it called again. "I'm lost. Please." I moved to the window and peered into the darkness. I couldn't see anything beyond. The faint glint of moonlight on wet pine needles. "Please, I'm hurt." The voice now came from the north. That didn't make sense. It was too fast, too far. I backed away from the windows, pulse thudding in my ears. The voice was wrong. The words were right. But the cadence, the rhythm, they were off. Like someone mimicking human speech without quite understanding how it worked. There was a stilted precision to it, each syllable too clean, too isolated. Then the voice came from the south. "Is anyone up there?" And finally, from directly beneath the tower, James, let me in." My blood turned to ice. It knew my name. It shouldn't have known my name. I clutched the rifle tighter, stepping back to the center of the room. My breath came fast, shallow. The temperature dropped again, abrupt and unnatural. I could see my breath fogging in front of me. I felt the tower sway slightly in the wind, but it wasn't the weather I feared anymore. It was the thing circling me. The intelligence of it. The banging began again, this time focused on the west window. The oldest one, the one with the worn seal, boom, boom, boom. Each hit came harder than the last. The glass trembled in the frame, bending slightly with every strike. "James," the voice said again, closer, clearer, still not right. I turned, off the lantern and crouched behind the desk, rifle braced, watching the window. The banging stopped. Silence fell again, thick and unnatural. Then came a new sound, a slow, deliberate scratching at the bottom edge of the west window. Like something was trying to work its way inside, scraping at the seal, trying to peel away the weather stripping. I inched toward the window and peeked. Something moved down there, a dark shape just beneath the sill, tall, thin, too still, too key. Be animal, too wrong to be human. It moved with intent, with purpose. This wasn't wild violence. This was problem solving. I backed away, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the rifle. My throat was dry. I wanted to scream, to call out, but some deep instinct told me not to, that it was waiting for that. Then the radio crackled. Jumped, nearly pulling the trigger. No voice came through, just static at first. Then faintly the sound of breathing, deep, slow, ragged. I shut the radio off. The cold grew worse. My fingertips started to go numb, even though I wore gloves. Frost formed on the inside of the glass, spreading from the edges in delicate lines. In July, the scratching intensified, then stopped. I heard a pressing sound, something large leaning against the glass. The window began to bend inward again. A tiny crack spiderwebbed from the top corner, another from the bottom. I didn't hesitate. I aimed and fired. The shot exploded. In the small room, deafening. The muzzle flash lighting up the interior. The window burst outward in a spray of shattered glass. A sound answered. A shriek, sharp and inhuman. It started like a high-pitched scream and morphed into something worse. Something no human mouth could form. Then, silence. Nothing moved. The forest was still. I stayed crouched with the rifle aimed at the broken window, breath shallow, muscles locked. Minutes passed, then hours. The cold slowly lifted. The ice on the remaining windows began to melt. I didn't move until the first light of dawn touched the mountains. My hands were cramped from gripping the rifle all night, my eyes gritty and dry. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat there in the pale morning light, watching the broken window, thinking only one thing. It had come back, and next time it wouldn't just knock. When daylight finally came, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like exposure. The morning sun filtered through the broken west window in slanted beams, catching on tiny shards of glass scattered across the floor. My hands were numb from gripping the rifle all night, my legs stiff from staying crouched behind the desk. I moved slowly, every joint aching, every movement accompanied by the subtle throb of a headache rooted at the base of my skull. I stood, cautiously, stepping over the shattered glass. The room looked different in the morning light. smaller somehow, like the night had compressed the space. My makeshift barricade near the door remained intact, but the air still felt disturbed, unsettled, as though something had moved through the tower while I wasn't watching. I glanced toward the broken window. A slight breeze passed through the jagged frame, brushing my face with a chill far too sharp for a summer morning. I walked to the door, slowly removing the brace and sliding back the deadbolt. I hesitated, hand on the knob, the memory of last night's voice still echoing faintly in my ears. Then I opened the door. The porch was empty. Rain from the night's earlier storm dripped steadily from the roof, forming a quiet rhythm that only made the silence more pronounced. I stepped outside and moved along the catwalk, eyes scanning the clearing below. And that's when I saw them, just to the left of the tower base. Footprints, massive, unmistakable, and utterly wrong. I descended the stairs 2 at a time, heart racing again, but now with a sick curiosity instead of fear. The prints circled the tower in a perfect loop, each one pressed nearly an inch deep into the damp dirt. They were over 18 inches long, the shape vaguely human but elongated, with narrow heels and broad, flat toes that ended in what looked like dull points, almost like claws, but blunted. The stride between each print was unnaturally long, at least 4 feet. I crouched beside one and placed my hand next to it. My palm barely covered half of it. The rain hadn't washed them away entirely, just softened the edges, filling the hollows with thin puddles that reflected the sky. I followed, the trail around the tower. At every window the prints veered closer, pressed deep into the earth as though the thing had leaned forward to inspect its entry points. At the west window, the broken one, the earth was the most disturbed, prints overlapping as it shifted its stance, moved deliberately, like it was working on something. I found the gouges next, claw marks in the wooden window frame, 5 long lines cut deep into the surface, running parallel from top to bottom. I ran my fingers over them. The edges were splintered and raw. These weren't from any tool I had, and they certainly weren't made by any forest animal. No bear I'd ever seen could cut that deep, that clean, with such vertical precision. I kept circling, the rifle slung over my shoulder, though in that moment, I felt like the weapon was a child's toy. At the east side of the tower I found more evidence, subtle scratches on the porch railing, as though long fingers or claws had been dragged along the wood. They followed the path toward the stairs. The pattern was consistent, deliberate, exploratory, systematic. I stood still for a long time, staring at the ground. I had proof now it wasn't just a story or a sleepless night. It wasn't paranoia or stress or isolation. The thing I'd seen, whatever it was, had come to my tower, had tested the structure, had tried to get inside, and if I hadn't fired that shot, I wasn't sure what I'd be waking up to, or if I'd have woken up at all. I rushed back up the stairs, my boots slipping slightly on the wet steps. I grabbed my camera from the desk and returned to the clearing, snapping photos of everything, footprints, claw marks, scratch trails. My hands were shaking so badly I had to brace the camera against my chest to keep the pictures from blurring. I documented every angle, every pattern, every trace of what had happened. By the time I returned to the tower, my breath was coming fast, chest tight from adrenaline. I spread the photos across the desk, watching the images appear on the digital screen one by one. They weren't just blurry glimpses or vague shapes. They were evidence. I reached for the radio, my hand fumbling with the dial. Static hissed back. At me. I adjusted the frequency, pressed the transmit button and tried again. Headquarters, this is Baker Peak. Come in. Over. Nothing. Baker Peak, emergency transmission. I need immediate contact. Something happened last night. Over. More static. I stood there, staring at the receiver, trying not to scream. Finally, a garbled voice broke through. I recognized it instantly. Baker. Peak, this is headquarters. E-signal. Weak. Repeat. I pressed the button again, leaning forward. Dan, it's James. Something was at the tower last night. I have photos, footprints, damage. It tried to break in. The response came slowly, fragmented. Visitor. Wildlife. Repeat, James, did you say visitor? Not a person, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Something else. It circled the tower, clawed at the windows. I shot at it. I have proof. Silence. Then Dan's voice, a bit clearer. James, you've been up there alone for weeks. Isolation can play tricks. I closed my eyes, teeth clenched. No tricks. I'm telling you, this thing was real. I didn't imagine it. You'll see the photos. I'll show you everything. Dan's tone shifted, gentle, clinical. The way you talk to someone on the edge. Let's wait until the supply run. 3 days. We'll send someone up. Just sit tight. The line went dead. I stared at the radio, the echo of his words lingering in my head. 3 days. 3 days alone, with whatever was out there. I turned to the window again. The clearing looked peaceful, even beautiful. But I knew better now. It was a mask, a lie. Something had come in the night, and I didn't think it was done with me yet. I spent the rest of that day preparing, not because I thought I could win against whatever had visited, but because pretending I had a plan kept me from falling apart. The air around the tower felt different now, like something had shifted in the forest's rhythm. Birds had returned in short, timid flurries, only to go silent again as dusk approached. I moved through the tower like a prisoner tidying up a cell, double-checking the locks, shifting furniture to fortify windows, tying off gear bags in case I needed to leave in a hurry. There was a tightness behind my eyes, a low-grade pressure like a storm about to break, but not the kind that came with thunderclouds. The radio remained useless, crackling with a loop of static and the occasional half-word. I tried 3 different channels, hoping for anything resembling human contact, but the only answer was a long hiss and a faint clicking, like breathing filtered through broken wire. At 7 p.m. I gave my routine check-in anyway, like some helpless gesture of control. Headquarters, Baker Peak. Weather clear, no smoke, temperatures dropping, visibility good in all quadrants, over. Static. Then silence. I ate early. Or rather, I tried. A can of soup heated on the propane stove, untouched after the first few spoonfuls. My stomach twisted with tension, hunger replaced by a gnawing awareness that nightfall was coming, and that it would come for me. I moved, my small desk to brace the main door. I placed my chair with its back to the interior wall so I could face the western window, the one with the weakest seal, the one it had worked on before. My rifle lay across my lap. The lantern was dim, the room swallowed in shadows that shifted with every creak of the tower. At 11:58 p.m., the sound stopped again. Every forest noise I had taken comfort in, the chirps of crickets, the sigh of pine branches in the wind, the distant calls of night birds, faded out in the span of a breath. The stillness was unnatural, not the soft. Quiet of night, but a total absence, like the world was holding itself still in anticipation. I stared at my watch. 12:01, 12:02. At 12:07, the first impact hit. It struck the north wall, one massive blow that made the entire structure shake on its stilts. Not the rhythmic, probing knocks of the night before, but something full of intent and weight, as if it had finally decided to stop testing and start forcing. I jumped to my feet, rifle aimed at the wall, though I couldn't see anything. My heart hammered in my chest. Every instinct screamed that this was different. The next strike hit the eastern window, then the southern side, then west. The same clockwise pattern, but each blow was stronger, more focused. The wood moaned, the windows rattled in their frames, The tower swayed under the force. Between the impacts, I heard it. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate. 3-beat rhythm. Thump, 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 pause, then the voice. "Help me," it whispered. Closer this time, clearer and terrifyingly human. "Is someone up there? I'm lost." James. That name again, spoken with sickening softness, like an old friend arriving uninvited. But the voice was fractured, mimicked. It repeated phrases I had heard before, mixing them up, replaying them out of sequence. It wasn't just trying to sound human anymore, it was learning how to manipulate me. The banging resumed, centered again on the west window. I aimed my rifle but held my fire. The glass bulged inward, tiny hairline cracks branching out like ice spreading across the surface. Then came the scratching again. Not random, not frantic, but surgical. It focused on the weather stripping like before, worrying it loose with some sharp, unseen tool. The sound sent goosebumps across my skin. I moved slowly, silently, crouching by the bed to get a better angle on the window. In the dim lantern light, I could just make out a shadow beneath the frame, thin, elongated fingers moving with delicate, terrifying precision. Peeling away what remained of the seal, and then the radio crackled again. Not with voices, but with something worse. A single, drawn-out breath followed by silence, then more static. I turned the volume down and backed away, eyes never leaving. The west window. It was colder than the night before. I could see my breath clearly hanging in front of me like fog. My teeth began to chatter. A thin sheen of frost gathered on the inside of the windows, even as sweat clung to my back and neck. My body didn't know what to feel. Fight, flight, or freeze. At 3:17 a.m. the seal gave way. The sound of it tearing loose was soft, almost anticlimactic. But what followed was not. A visible pressure pushed against the glass from outside, from multiple points, as though multiple limbs were bracing to force it inward. The pane bowed, groaning audibly, the cracks deepening. I could hear the glass screaming under the stress. I fired. The gunshot tore through the silence, deafening in the enclosed space. The window exploded outward in a blast of jagged shards. What answered was no bear, no human. The sound it made was wrong, high-pitched, metallic, and full of fury. It started as a scream, then twisted into something shrill and chattering, like thousands of insects hissing in unison. Then silence again. I remained frozen, rifle trained on the open window, breath caught halfway to panic. I saw nothing, no figure, no movement, only the dark forest beyond. But I felt it. I felt its absence like a wound, like something had been inches from breaching the line and had only just pulled back. I didn't move for over an hour. Every noise, every gust of wind or shifting board sounded like a return, but the forest remained still. Eventually the cold began to lift, though the warmth didn't return. I sat with my back against the far wall, rifle across my chest, the broken window leaking in the smell of pine and ash. By dawn I was trembling. My muscles ached, my hands numb and useless from how long I'd held the weapon. I didn't dare sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. Something had tried to get, and I had the sinking feeling it had only been rehearsing. I didn't sleep. Even as sunlight seeped through the broken west window and spread its pale warmth across the floor, I couldn't close my eyes. Every time I blinked too long, I saw it again. Shadows shifting beneath the window frame, the way the glass bowed inward under invisible pressure. The voice that said my name in a tone that barely passed for human. I sat with my back against the wall, the rifle across my lap, eyes flicking from the door to the shattered window to the tree line beyond. The forest looked calm, normal even. But after 3 nights of invasion, I knew better. The quiet was a disguise, a mask something had learned to wear. At 8:43 a.m. I heard a truck engine. The sound was distant at first, then grew steadily louder. Tires crunching gravel, an approaching vehicle. My heart leapt, then faltered. Nothing should be coming until the next supply run, at least 2 days from now. I reached for the binoculars and scanned the clearing. The white Forest Service pickup came into view, crawling up the path toward the tower. Dan Mitchell's truck. He parked near the base of the stairs and stepped out, looking up at the cabin like he'd done a dozen times before. He wore his usual green uniform, the Forest Service badge gleaming against his shirt, and a clipboard tucked under one arm. From a distance, he looked normal, familiar. A friend, a supervisor, someone I should have been relieved to see, but I wasn't. As he started up the stairs, something in my chest clenched. A delay, a hesitation I couldn't explain. I moved quickly, sliding the desk barricade away from the door, keeping the rifle low but in hand. My palms were sweating, my breath shallow. I felt stupid, paranoid. But still, I didn't let go of the gun. A knock on the door, 3 times evenly spaced. "James, you in there?" Dan's voice clear and friendly. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, 1 second." I pulled the door open slowly. Dan stepped inside, blinking against the dim light. The moment his eyes adjusted, he froze, his expression shifting from neutral to something between concern and disbelief. "Jesus, Wilson, you look like hell." He wasn't wrong. I probably did. I hadn't slept in over 48 hours. My shirt was stained with sweat and dust. There were cuts on my knuckles from the recoil of the rifle. But Dan's gaze shifted quickly from me to the broken window, to the shattered glass across the floor, to the shell casing still gleaming near the desk. "What the hell happened here?" he asked, voice low. I rubbed at my eyes. "Something tried to get in last night. Same as the night before, only worse. It was working at the window seal. I shot when it started to break through." Dan walked over to the west window, kneeling beside the frame. He ran his fingers along the deep gouges in the wood, the missing strip of weather seal, the frosted edge of the shattered pane. He didn't say anything for a moment. "You fired your weapon?" he asked finally. "Yes," I said, "at whatever was trying to come through." "What was it?" he asked. "An animal?" "I don't know. It wasn't human. It spoke. It mimicked voices. It knew my name." Dan stood slowly. His movements were smooth, too smooth, like someone trying not to appear threatening. "You've been up here a long time," he said gently. "Alone, that kind of stress, especially with the storms, it can mess with your perception." I stepped back. Just once. A single shift of weight. "I'm not imagining this, Dan. I have pictures. I showed you over the radio, footprints, scratches. You said yourself, but something was wrong." The way he stood, his shoulders too square, his posture too precise. And then I saw it, his watch. Dan always wore his watch on his left wrist, face outward. I remembered because he had an old injury on that arm, a scar from a chainsaw accident. But today the watch was on his right wrist and turned inward, like someone had seen it on the wrong hand and tried to copy it without understanding why it was worn that way. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You need sleep," he said. "Rest. That's what this is. You're exhausted." I didn't reply. I was watching his eyes now. Human eyes move constantly, tiny involuntary movements as they scan a room. Dan's didn't. They moved in deliberate, mechanical steps, pausing too long, turning too slowly, like a machine trying to mimic a person. And then he stepped toward the broken window. "I'll help you replace this," he said. "We've got spare panes at the truck. I'll check the generator too. That might be causing your radio issues." Something in his voice was off, too flat, like emotion turned down to zero. I moved subtly toward the desk, toward the rifle. "What about Reynolds Ridge?" I asked, watching him closely. "You said yesterday there were fires, lightning strikes." Dan blinked. "Once. Slowly, under control, he replied smoothly. That wasn't right. Dan was always precise with details, containment percentages, crew positions, resource statuses, never vague, never just under control. I gripped the rifle. He turned back to face me, eyes narrowing. "James," he said, almost pleading now, "you're confused. Let me help." My stomach turned. His voice had dropped an octave, the expression on his face, almost human. Almost. Like someone trying to wear a feeling instead of having one. "Who are you?" I asked quietly. He tilted his head. Just a bit too much. His pupils dilated suddenly, overtaking his irises, turning his eyes into two black holes. Just for a second. Then they shrank again. "I'll check the generator," he said, voice calm. "Might be useful." And without another word, he turned and walked out the door. I stood in the broken window's light, staring after him. That wasn't Dan Mitchell. Not anymore. The moment the door closed behind him, I dropped the act. I didn't wait to see where it was going or whether it'd return. I grabbed my backpack and rifle, slinging them over my shoulder in one frantic motion. My boots hit the steps hard as I descended, skipping the final two and landing in a crouch. I stayed beneath the line of the windows, hidden from sight. I didn't look back at the tower. I didn't want to see what might be watching from the broken window or hear its steps if it changed its mind and came after me. The forest was still, and heavy with moisture. The clouds had begun to roll back, leaving the air dense, sunlight filtering weakly through the canopy. I moved quickly and quietly across the clearing, heart hammering in my chest, lungs aching from shallow breaths. I didn't follow the trail toward the generator like it expected me to. Instead, I moved in the opposite direction, toward the eastern tree line, back to the place where I'd first seen the figure days ago. It wasn't just a hunch. It was instinct. A deep, bone-deep sense that whatever was masquerading as Dan had come from there. That the truth was buried in that direction, literally or otherwise. The trees closed around me like jaws. I pushed through the branches, ignoring the sting of pine needles against my arms and face. The rifle stayed in my hands, though the sweat made it slick in my grip. As I moved deeper into the woods, I noticed it again. The unnatural quiet. No birds. No insects. Not even the wind. It was as if sound itself had been swallowed by something vast and watching. Then I saw the trail. It wasn't a hiking path or anything formal, just a line of broken ferns, trampled undergrowth, and dark stains on leaves and soil. The signs were fresh. Some of the blood was still wet. I followed it slowly, carefully, every footstep deliberate. The deeper I went, the more obvious the signs became. Branches broken at shoulder height, drag marks through the moss. Something heavy had been pulled this way. About 40 yards in, I found the first piece of clothing, a torn scrap of khaki fabric snagged on a branch, with a dark green stripe running diagonally across it. Forest Service issue. My stomach turned. 20 feet further, I found more. A shredded sleeve, a button glinting on the forest floor, the edge of a pocket turned inside out like someone had stripped it hastily. Then, half buried beneath a layer of hastily piled branches, I saw the hand. At first, I thought it was a glove, dirt-smeared, twisted at an odd angle. But then I saw the fingernails, the curve of the knuckles, the exposed wrist, jagged where it had been torn away, pale skin, waxy and still. The watch on the wrist was unmistakable, silver, face, band worn smooth with age, turned outward on the left hand. Dan's watch. I nearly dropped the rifle. My throat constricted with a dry, rising nausea. I stumbled backward and tripped over a root, falling to one knee. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. Instead, I forced myself to crawl forward and pulled aside the covering of branches with the end of my rifle. The hand had been just the beginning. The body beneath the debris wasn't whole. What remained of Dan Mitchell lay twisted in a shallow depression in the dirt. His uniform was torn, soaked through with blood. The skin along his chest and abdomen had been peeled away jaggedly, like someone had tried to remove it and only half finished the job. His jaw hung open at an unnatural angle, teeth bared, lips curled back as if in mid-scream. But what truly shattered me was the emptiness. His chest cavity was hollow, no organs, no heart, just a dark, deflated space, like something had worn him and then discarded the husk when it no longer fit. I fell backward, landing hard, dry heaving into the dirt. It hadn't just killed Dan, it had used him, worn him. I don't know how long I sat there, eyes locked on what was left of the man I'd known for 3 years. I couldn't move, could barely breathe. The forest felt like it was closing in around me, branches leaning closer, leaves curling downward. The silence was absolute, pressing against my skull like static. Eventually, some shred of survival instinct kicked in. I stood, legs trembling beneath me, and took one last look at Dan. I saw his belt buckle, a silver trout, the one he won in that fishing tournament he never stopped talking about. That little detail, the humanity of it, hit harder than anything else. He'd had a life, a past, and now he was nothing but skin stretched over memory. I turned and ran. Branches tore at my clothes and face. I didn't care. I crashed through. The brush like a spooked animal, my rifle clutched to my chest. My only thought, I left it alone in the tower. That thing, whatever it truly was still up there, walking around in Dan's form. And I'd given it space, time, access. I broke from the trees into the clearing, lungs burning, legs shaking. The tower loomed above me. The door was slightly ajar, swinging in the breeze. A smear of fresh blood trailed from the top of the stairs down to the dirt. The same dark wet red I'd seen on the forest floor. It had been inside and now it was gone. I climbed the stairs slowly, rifle raised. The inside of the tower was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. My camera was gone. The photos, the proof, vanished. The desk had been rifled through, papers scattered. The radio was turned on, volume dialed to maximum, blasting static into the small room like a scream of white noise. I turned it off, heart pounding. That was its last message. Was never hiding from you. You were always hiding from me. I stood in the center of the tower, the door swaying gently behind me, letting in the thin mountain breeze that now carried with it no comfort, only cold exposure. Everything inside looked almost exactly as I had left it. The chair, the lantern, the cluttered desk, but it was wrong. It had been touched. That presence I'd felt in the woods had been here, walked these creaking floorboards in my absence, and it had taken what mattered. The camera was gone. The photographs I'd taken, footprints, claw marks, the scratched frames, the shredded weather stripping, had vanished. Even the backup memory card, which I'd kept taped beneath the desk drawer, had been peeled away as if it knew exactly where to look. I opened every compartment, searched every shelf, overturned everything. Nothing. All of it. Gone. Panic bloomed beneath my skin, thick and raw. The evidence had been my lifeline. Without it, I was just a sleep-deprived fire lookout with a broken window and a loaded rifle, talking about voices in the night and monsters that wore human skin. I imagined walking into the ranger station trying to explain any of this, and the image crumbled before it even formed. No one would believe me. No one could. The radio hissed softly behind me. I turned slowly. It had been off when I left. Now it sat in the middle of the desk, moved from its mounting bracket, set to the emergency broadcast frequency. The volume dial had been turned all the way up. Static poured from the speaker, louder than it should have been in the enclosed space. White noise that sounded too much like breathing. I reached forward and shut it off. The silence that followed was suffocating. There was no mistake now. It had been inside. While I'd been in the woods discovering Dan's body, it had been here, rifling through my belongings, erasing the only truth I had left. And worse, it had wanted me to know it had been here. It had left the radio on as a message, not a warning, a promise. I sat on the edge of the bed, not knowing how long I stayed there. My mind reeled with the timeline. I'd found Dan in the woods less than an hour ago. The creature must have returned while I was gone, searched the place and taken what it needed. Then it left, down the mountain, following a trail I would never find in time. My eyes moved slowly to the floor, where wet footprints stained the boards just inside the threshold. Not muddy, not human, just faint smears in a pattern that didn't match any boot, paw, or claw I'd ever seen. The prints vanished near the western wall, right where the stairs outside led down to the forest trail. But that wasn't what made my stomach turn. It was the fact that the blood, Dan's blood, was on the floor too. Not much, but enough to mark a path. From the door, across the room and out again, a deliberate trail. It hadn't just visited. It had performed something, like a final act in a ritual I didn't understand. Or maybe it was marking the tower, claiming it. I staggered to my feet and moved toward the window, the broken one. The view stretched wide across the clearing and down toward the trail that would eventually reach the ranger station. The trail was empty, but I could feel something out there. It was moving through the forest with my camera, my proof, with Dan's skin maybe, with his voice. And if it had taken Dan, what stopped it? From taking someone else? It could be anyone by now. Any voice on the radio, any figure stepping out from a truck. The thought made my vision swim. I backed away from the window. I checked the tower top to bottom again. The claw marks on the walls remained. Faint, but real. The broken window was still jagged. The west wall still had scratches, but now it all looked staged. Like a scene set up for me to explain, only to be told later it was my own handiwork in some mental spiral. A fabrication of solitude and sleeplessness. They'd say I imagined it, that I cracked under the pressure, that the storm and the isolation got to me. They might even be right, except they weren't. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard, what I'd felt, and I knew, with the kind of certainty that drills down into your bones, that I couldn't stay. Here another night. The tower wasn't just vulnerable, it was invited. It had been compromised, twisted into something familiar on the outside, but corrupted at the core. It wasn't a safe haven anymore. It was bait, and I was the trap's final piece. I made the decision the way a man makes a tourniquet, quickly, and knowing something important is going to die. I couldn't stay in the tower another night. The idea of darkness settling over these trees again, of hearing that voice outside, the windows, of seeing the glass flex inward, and wondering whether this would be the time it finally made it through. I couldn't do it. Not one more hour. Not when the proof was gone. Not when the only thing that made me feel sane was the weight of the rifle in my hands. The tower was no longer mine. It had been trespassed, violated. Every plank in the floor, every familiar corner, now felt like a stranger's skin. The thought of sleeping there, even in daylight, made my stomach turn. I couldn't trust anything anymore. Not the windows, not the locks, not even the radio. I'd already heard my name coming from the forest. What if next time it came from the airwaves? What if it came in my own voice? I dumped my gear onto the bed and began sorting it with hands that trembled but moved fast. I didn't have time to overthink. I had maybe an hour or two of daylight left, and if I was going to make it down the mountain without lighting a path for something to follow, I had to go now. I packed only what mattered: a water bottle, a small first aid kit, protein bars, my flashlight, a box of matches, the hunting knife. No notebooks, no journals, no maps. I already knew the way, and memories were heavier than they looked. I pulled on my thickest hiking boots and layered a long-sleeved thermal shirt under my jacket. Even though it was July, the forest turned cold at night, and I didn't know how long I'd be out there. My ankle still throbbed from yesterday's scramble down the ravine, but adrenaline numbed it enough to move. I loaded the rifle with the remaining rounds, 26 left plus the one in the chamber, and slung it over my shoulder. I took one last look at the room. 3 seasons. 3 years of peace, routine, purpose, all reduced to a haunted shell in a matter of days. The desk still bore scratches from my boots. The shelf still leaned slightly from when I over-tightened a bolt last summer. But now it felt like a replica, a movie set built to imitate a life I no longer lived. The broken window stared back at me like an unblinking eye. I turned away. Descending the tower stairs was surreal. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though gravity itself resisted my escape. The clearing looked deceptively still. The sky overhead had turned pale, the early signs of dusk whispering through the treetops. I checked the ground. No fresh footprints except my own, and what I assumed were Dan's from earlier. I still couldn't bring myself to call it his name, without imagining the thing inside his skin. The main trail down the mountain was the most direct route to the ranger station, but it was also the most obvious. If it had watched me long enough to mimic a voice, to copy a uniform, then it knew that trail too. It would expect me to take it, so I didn't. Instead, I turned east toward the maintenance path, a rougher, less used route that eventually joined with an old logging road. It was longer and harder, but it kept me away from where I knew it would follow. The forest swallowed me almost immediately. Dense branches reached out like fingers. The light dimmed fast under the thick canopy. I moved quietly but urgently, ears tuned for anything unnatural. Every twig snap made my pulse spike. Every gust of wind through the trees sounded like breath on the back of my neck. About 10 minutes in, I paused to catch my breath and listen. Nothing, just the rustle of pine needles and the occasional creak of distant branches. But even that quiet didn't feel right. It felt hollow, like sound had been thinned somehow, diluted, like the trees were waiting. I pressed on. I didn't think about what I would do when I reached the road. I didn't think about whether the ranger station would still be standing, or if anyone at the bottom of the mountain would believe a word I said. I only knew that I had to move, that staying still was what it wanted, that fear was its trap. And I knew this, more than anything, else it wasn't finished with me. It had worn a man I respected. It had stolen my voice, my truth, my sense of control. It had reached up through the floorboards of my sanctuary and pulled reality out from under me. And if I didn't get away now, I wouldn't be the one walking out of those woods. Something else would. The forest thickened as I descended deeper into the mountain's eastern slope, branches grabbing at my sleeves like hands trying to hold me back. The maintenance trail had nearly vanished beneath a bed of wet pine needles and overgrowth, but I pressed on, relying on instinct and fading daylight to guide my steps. My legs ached, my ankle throbbed, but fear kept me moving. I didn't dare stop, not while the woods still felt wrong. Not while the air behind me carried the same static tension as the moment before a lightning strike. After nearly an hour of trudging through uneven terrain, I heard something ahead. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, too heavy to be an animal, too measured to be random. I dropped into a crouch behind a downed tree, rifle raised, breath held in my throat. Then I saw it, a flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. "Hello?" a voice called. Male. Familiar. Forest Service. "Anyone out?" There I froze, pulse thudding in my ears. It was Ryan Campbell, one of the younger rangers, friendly, professional, always the first to volunteer for long patrols. I remembered his voice from radio check-ins. It sounded like him. But after Dan, I didn't trust voices anymore. The light moved closer. Then stopped. "I know someone's there," Ryan called. "I can see your tracks in the mud. Identify yourself." I stood slowly, rifle pointed downward but ready. "Ryan," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's James. James Wilson from Baker Peak." The light swung toward me, momentarily blinding. Then it lowered, and Ryan emerged from the trees, his face coming into focus beneath the brim of his ranger hat. "Jesus, James," he said, approaching cautiously. "What the hell are you doing out here after dark?" I hesitated. "Something happened at the tower. Dan's dead. I found his body in the woods. Whatever's been stalking the tower, it's wearing him." Ryan's face changed, concern darkening, into something closer to horror. He stepped forward quickly but carefully until he stood just a few feet away. "Dead?" he whispered. "What are you talking about?" "I found him," I said. "Not just dead, emptied. Like something used him, and it came back as him. Talked like him, moved like him. It was in my tower. It took my evidence. It knew my name." Ryan didn't speak for a moment. He just stared. Then slowly, he reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. "I'll call it in," he said. "Stay here." But before he could speak into the mic, his face changed again. His eyes widened, not at me, but at something behind me. His expression shifted in an instant, from concern to confusion to naked fear. His mouth moved, but for a moment no sound came out. Then finally he whispered, "Run." My blood turned to ice. "What?" I croaked. "Don't look back," Ryan said, already reaching for his sidearm. "Just run." I didn't hesitate. Branches snapped behind me as I tore through the underbrush. Ryan's flashlight beam vanished, in a wild arc as he moved. Then came the gunshots, 3, then a pause, then 2 more. Sharp cracks that shattered the quiet like lightning bolts. And then a scream. Not Ryan's, something else. Something high-pitched and alien and wrong, like a siren made of broken glass and metal, rising and falling in jagged waves. The sound stabbed straight through my chest, made my knees weak, my breath hitch. But I didn't stop. I ran until the forest blurred, until I wasn't sure if my feet touched the ground or if I was falling forward in a nightmare. The trees thinned, the trail widened. Somewhere behind me the scream faded, but not like it had gone away. More like it had shifted, moved ahead, waited. Didn't care where I was going anymore, just away. Every thought I had narrowed to a single burning instinct. If I stop, I die. I finally stumbled to a halt near a bend in the path, collapsing behind a fallen log. My lungs burned, my legs shook. I kept the rifle clutched to my chest like it could protect me from things that didn't bleed. The woods were still again, but not safe. Not empty. I waited for the next sound, the next step, the next voice. What came? Instead was silence so deep it felt manufactured, as though the forest itself had been turned off. Somewhere out there, Ryan had screamed. Somewhere behind me or ahead of me, it was still hunting. I wasn't sure if it was chasing me anymore, or leading me. The trees began to thin as the ground leveled out beneath my boots, the heavy slope giving way to gravel and broken roots. I knew I was close. I recognized the dark silhouettes of road markers through the trees and the faint glint of moonlight, reflecting off something smooth, pavement. My lungs burned with each breath, every muscle trembling under the weight of adrenaline and exhaustion. I had been running for hours, maybe days, maybe years. Time had lost meaning somewhere back in the pines where voices didn't belong. I broke from the tree line like a wounded animal, stumbling into the shoulder of the forest road. The surface was uneven and cracked, the faded yellow lines stretching into silence in both directions. No headlights, no engine sounds, nothing. I limped forward, rifle still in hand, dragging one foot slightly behind me. The ankle from earlier now swollen and tender. The world felt unreal, flattened by fatigue. The pain was distant, background noise behind the pounding in my skull and the echo of Ryan's scream, still chasing me like a second shadow. Then came light, faint at first, then brighter. Headlights cresting a bend in the road, illuminating the trees like a spotlight from heaven. A truck. I tried to wave, but my arms were too heavy. My knees gave out, and I collapsed to the asphalt just as the tires screeched and the vehicle skidded to a stop. Doors flung open. Footsteps ran toward me. A woman's voice, urgent, calm, cutting through the haze like clean air. Oh my God, you hurt? Can you hear me? I blinked up at her. Brown eyes, a ponytail, hands on my shoulders, warm, real. She was talking, checking my limbs, looking for blood. I managed one word, barely. Help. She nodded. I'm Sarah. I'm going to get you to help, okay? Just stay with me. She guided me into the truck, buckled me in like a child. The engine rumbled back to life as she turned us toward the ranger station, tires grinding gravel in reverse. I watched the trees retreat behind us through the side mirror, their outlines no longer shapes. I'd learned what lived in shadows. I didn't tell her the full story. I couldn't. I just held onto the door handle with one hand and my rifle with the other, fingers twitching every time the wind shifted. It was over, for now. But as Sarah drove us down that winding road, I felt no triumph, just survival. And the certainty that it was still out there, somewhere in the woods, wearing someone else's skin, watching someone else's door, whispering someone else's name. And maybe, just maybe, it had learned mine a little too well. The hospital room was quiet, too quiet for someone who had just survived what I did. No beeping machines, no murmuring voices in the hallway, just white walls, the low hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional shuffle of rubber-soled shoes passing by. I lay on the thin bed for 3 days, wrapped in bandages and gauze, IV drip in my arm, eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The doctors told me I was suffering from extreme dehydration, a sprained ankle and a minor concussion. But what they really focused on was my mind. Every time someone asked what happened, I tried to explain. I spoke about the tower, the scratching, the footprints, Dan's voice speaking after he was already dead. I described the creature's shape, its mimicry, the deep cold, the way it peeled Dan open and wore him like a second skin. I showed them the bruises, the scars, the burns on my hands from the rifle barrel after I'd held it all night, but they just nodded politely, scribbled notes, offered understanding expressions that never reached their eyes. I could see it in their faces. They didn't believe me. Not really. The authorities conducted a search of the area. They found the broken window. They found claw marks, bloodstains, even some drag marks in the woods. But no body, no footprints, no signs of a creature, just disturbed ground and the suggestion of wildlife. The storm, they said, had washed away most of the evidence. Nature is messy, they told me. Bears act strangely sometimes. Isolation causes hallucinations. No one found Ryan Campbell either. His patrol truck was discovered parked at a trailhead, 3 miles from where I'd last seen him. Radio inside, rifle missing. No signs of struggle, no body, no blood. Just vanished. In their official report, they chalked it up to stress, prolonged isolation, sleep deprivation. They added words, like delusional episode and trauma-induced paranoia. I didn't argue. What would be the point? I already knew the truth. And I also knew what I had seen would follow me no matter how far I ran from Baker Peak. I quit the Forest Service the day I was discharged. I moved to Seattle and found a job as a night security guard in a downtown office building, concrete walls, locked doors, fluorescent lighting. No windows that open, no trees. I keep to the upper floors, away from alleys. away from anything with too much shadow. Most nights I sleep okay, but when storms roll in from the Pacific and thunder echoes through the buildings like distant footsteps, I sometimes wake with the distinct feeling that someone is outside my apartment door. And sometimes, just before sleep takes me, I swear I hear my name spoken in a voice that sounds almost like mine. It's been 6 months since Baker Peak, and still, I wake some nights with a rifle that isn't there clutched in hands that won't stop shaking. The tower is long behind me now, replaced by streetlights and concrete and the faint, ever-present hum of traffic. But the silence of the forest never really leaves you. It's in the spaces between passing cars, in the lull between elevator dings, in the way people pause before they say your name like they're making sure it's really you. They shut down the lookout after my incident. Officially, it's temporary, due to low staffing and weather damage, but I heard one of the guys at the ranger station joke that no one wants to be the next crazy lookout. My name's become shorthand for hallucination, delusion, breakdown, Baker Peak syndrome, they call it. But it wasn't in my head. I know that now more than ever. A week ago, I got a package, no return address, just a padded envelope left on my doorstep. Inside was a flash drive. I almost threw it away, thought it might have been a prank. Curiosity got the better of me. I plugged it into an old laptop I'd kept in a drawer. There were only 3 files. Photos, grainy, unsteady, but familiar. The claw marks on the support beams, the prints in the mud, the west window shattered, jagged with cold and morning light. My missing pictures, the ones it had taken. No note, no explanation, just that quiet confirmation. I hadn't imagined it. It wanted me to know. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it meant to erase everything but missed these. Or maybe it wanted me to see them again, to remember, to know it still watches. That I was never meant to escape clean. Since then I've noticed things. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. Faces in crowds that don't quite move right. Smiles too slow, blinks too deliberate. A man at the bus stop who wore a park ranger's badge, but his boots were mismatched and he called me Wilson without ever being introduced. The voice on the intercom at work mispronounced my name last night, and then whispered it correctly. Sometimes I stand by my apartment window and look out at the alley below, where the shadows stretch long between the dumpsters. I count the footsteps of passers-by, listen for the ones that fall out of rhythm, because I know now that it doesn't need the woods. It doesn't need the tower. It learned, it changed, and it followed me. I don't think it wants to kill me. Not yet. I think it wants to become me, and all it needs is one more night, where I let my guard down, where I open the door, where I believe the voice when it finally says, "It's safe now, James, you can let me in." Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.